Right folks, in this video I'm going to be talking you through a little bit of a introduction to the Unit 3 Digital Media Skills exam as part of the Level 3 National Extended Certificate in Creative Digital Media Production, and for this video we're going to focus on the digital content production pathway. So all I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of a rundown of how the exam works. Obviously, if you're looking at this from someone who does not go to Thomas Rotherham College, yours might be a bit different. So there might be a few bits that you might have to adapt to whatever institution you're looking at. So this is a little bit of an overview of what's going to happen. So the exam board will release the exam paper, and that usually happens around about the end of February time, give or take. It's usually around about the last week in February. I think it's normally the first Monday of the last week. That paper will have a overall set task brief for the entire exam paper, but then within that there are 5 individual briefs that you can choose to do to contribute towards the situation or the scenario. Every brief that's set is going to have a different focus, and that focus will obviously depend on what sort of internal units you have done. So there'll be one that focuses on video, one that focuses on audio, web, digital publishing, or video games. So for us, we always do the digital publishing brief, alright, because obviously our internal units are all built around this particular brief, so we will always do that brief. This is the set brief from last time, so they're usually something similar to this, but obviously it'll depend on what the actual exam paper is for that particular year. So when you look at your specific brief, so this is the brief here from 2023, I think. Is it 2023? Yeah, 2023. For the digital publishing brief, it will list a set of specific requirements that you have got to meet when you make your product. So you can see here it's got a little bit of a description of what it wants. It wants a how-to guide. It tells you how many pages it wants. It tells you how many what the dimensions of each page needs to be, how it needs to be exported, and then a list of specific skills that you will need to demonstrate when you make that product. So you've got things like original photography, brushes and textures, text on a path, original copy, etc, 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 etc. So these are the things that you have got to demonstrate that you can do. You've got to make sure that every part of this brief has been met, and you've also got to prove that you have met that as well. Now that could be through the actual final product itself that you make, or through your production diary as well, so your activity log as well, or a bit of both, but I'll go over those in a bit more detail towards the end of the video. So these are what you have to do. Obviously it'll all be different depending on what brief you choose to do, but this is almost like a tick list. So if you tick them off as you go along to make sure you've definitely done them, that's usually a bit of good practice to do. So for the digital publishing brief, we will always do this brief. It's usually brief number 4, but it's always something that's going to be page layout design related. So in the past it's been things like magazines, it's been newspapers, leaflets, how-to guides, posters, etc. The thing it will definitely be is something that involves a combination of images and text. Alright? And all of these skills that you can see at the bottom here are stuff that you can usually expect that you will have to demonstrate. So there's always some photography, there's always some image manipulation of those photographs, so using Photoshop. There might even be some creation of original assets using Photoshop as well, like things like mastheads or logos, buttons, etc, etc. There'll be some desktop publishing involved, which will be doing things like InDesign. There might be some audio recording. That's not happened every year, but it's definitely been on there before. And then some written copy as well. So things like writing an article or writing a guide or writing literally anything really. Usually some sort of original copy is involved in there to some capacity. So you can see that all these skills are all stuff that you have done in your internal units as well. So obviously you've done photography for Unit 30 and Unit 14 for your magazines and for your leaflets and posters. You've done loads of image manipulation and desktop publishing in those as well. You've done audio recording for your interview techniques unit, and you've done writing copy for your journalism unit as well. So it's almost like a combination of everything you've done throughout your 2-year course. So the exam itself, you've got 3 different sections. You've got the first section, which is called the monitored preparatory period. It just means planning and research. That's 5 hours long. Activity 1, which is where you will generate original assets, is what they call it. And again, that's 5 hours long. And activity 2, which is the actual production of your product, which is 15 hours long. Each one of these sessions will run over multiple days. The first 2 sessions are done mostly during lesson time. And activity 2 is not done in lesson time. You'll do that over 3 consecutive days. But I'll go over that in a bit more detail when I go over what's going to happen in each of these sections. So let's start off with the first section. The first section is your monitored preparatory period, 5 hours long, which you will do over 3 lessons. Now in this section, it's basically your planning and research, right? So in this section, you will need to be doing things like reviewing the brief, finding out what it is you've got to do, maybe things like doing some very brief flat plans, planning what photographs you might want to take, looking at real examples to get ideas, generating examples. But the big thing that you'll need to do as well is this one here, sourcing secondary assets, because in the exam, this is the only section of the exam where you will have access to the internet, right? So anything that you might need from secondary sources, so things like downloading fonts, sourcing secondary images, sourcing links that you might need, sourcing brushes you might want to use, colour palettes, finding examples that you might want to make reference to, anything that you need online, you can get in this section. But you can only get it in this section, so you can't go home and do additional research and bring those things into the exam. You can only do it in this time, so in this 5 hour period. So that's a really important thing. All right, they don't need to be royalty free. It can be as long as you log where it has come from. All right, so you've got the reference. Okay, so they don't need to be. It can be any resources you need. That's not relevant for this part of the exam. So it's planning and research basically, but that's the big thing. So on here, some things that I've made note of, other things you could do could be things like review the information in the exam booklet, produce a workflow checklist, which is just getting a checklist of what you need to do, research on the production theme or focus. That's a big one. That's a really important one. We're looking at real examples, because one of the things you get graded on is how conventional is your product. So do your research, find your examples. You could plan any written copy you've got to do, or any audio scripts you've got to write. Plan your primary assets, so plan your photography, plan your audio, plan anything else you might need to do. I've already mentioned source and secondary assets. You could do things like schedules and risk assessments, but they're not massively important. One thing I will say is everything that you do in this section does not go towards your grade. All right, this is all stuff that you do to help you with the stuff that does get graded. So none of this stuff gets sent out to the exam board. Okay, this is also done in supervised conditions as well, so it doesn't mean formal exam conditions, it just means supervised. So I can be there in the lesson, but I can't give you any specific help or support or guidance. I'm just there to make sure you basically don't set the room on fire when you're doing this stuff. So that's the first section. So activity 1. Now this is the stuff where this is what you do get graded on. Okay, so this is the second section, activity 1. So in this section, again, it's 5 hours long, and this is basically where you will have the opportunity to create or generate any original assets that you will need to make your project. So that will include taking your photographs, recording any audio you might need, writing any original copy that you might need to write, but it also includes any original assets that you have got to make. So that might include things like logos. It might include things like, I mean, if you go back and look on the previous exam brief, they wanted you to make forwards and backwards arrows, original icons, things like that. So anything that's original that you need to make yourself, you can make it in this section here. All right, but you can't manipulate it. You can just create it, which is a little bit confusing. Yeah, so you can take your photos, but you can't edit them, right? So that's what comes into this section here. This section is done under formal exam conditions. All right, so that's where it will be things like, you know, silence, working individually, you know, etc., etc., etc. So what's going to happen with this section is, after you have finished your monitor prep period, there's going to be a 2-week period where you will be able to book a slot into the studio and create any assets that you need. Okay, so photography, audio, maybe video, but I think it's unlikely you'll be required to do video in this section because there is a specific brief for video. So you'll have 2 weeks to do that. Okay, so you'll get two weeks where you book a time in the studio, you do all the things you need to do, and then that's it. Then once that 2-week period has finished, we will then have lesson time to do the rest of the activity 1, which will include things like creating assets that you might need using Photoshop, but more importantly, doing 5 pages for your activity log. Okay, so your activity log is really important because it is 1/3 of your overall grade. Now this is basically the same as your production diary that you've been doing for the last couple of years for all your practical work in lesson. So your activity log is where you basically explain what you did, how you did it, but more importantly, why you did it. That's the key thing. The key thing is justifying your decision. So for example, this one here says, during my photo shoot, I mainly use singular model, as my research has taught me that the convention of how-to guides, they tend to have a singular model. So they said what they've done and said why they did it, which acted out the function of each page rather than several models, which may lead to confusion/disorientation within the audience. Again, explaining why they did, justifying the decision. I use a student within the 14 to 19 year age range, knowing that the audience, I've cut a bit off there, but you get the idea. They're explaining every single aspect of why they're taking these photographs. Okay, that's really, really important. This bit again talks about the assets that they've created, how they did it, why they did it, blah, 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 blah. So the key thing is justify your decisions, explaining why you've done it. Okay, that's really, really important. So you'll have time to do that as well. So 1 hour and 15 minutes to do your photo shoot, or whatever else it is you've got to do, and then 3 hours and 45 minutes to do the rest of it. If you want to, if let's say, for example, you do a first photo shoot and you're not happy with it and you want to book a second photo shoot out, you can do that, but obviously that will eat into the rest of your time for activity 1. All right, so you can do that. It's just that'll be down to your discretion how you use that time. So just be very careful about that. Okay. Right, activity 2, the final bit. This is where you cobble everything together. Okay, so it's 15 hours in total, but it will be sat over 3 days. What we usually do is we usually have it over 3 days where you will do 9 o'clock till 11:30, then an hour for your lunch, and then 12:30 till 3 o'clock for 3 days. Right? This is where you will take everything that you've done in your monitor prep period, your activity 1, and you will cobble it all together and make the thing that it is you need to make. So here's some examples of 2023 exam products. So you can see there you've got the photos that this person created and the product they eventually made. Same with this one, the products that they made and then what they eventually created. You can see it all coming together there. So this is what you've got to be making, or what this will be, you know, the product you're going to have to make. Not necessarily this product specifically, but you get the idea. So this will be where you will achieve most of this stuff. Not all of it, but most of it will be done in here. So further on from this as well, you've got another 10 pages that you need to add to your activity log. Same sort of thing, what you did, how you did it, but more importantly, why you did it. That's the big thing here. What were you trying to achieve? If you achieved it, great. If not, why not? But I want to be knowing what tools you used. I want to know why you used those tools. I want to know what font you use. I want to know why you use that font. I want to know what colour you use, how you changed the colour of something, why you chose that particular colour, etc, etc. So the key thing is justifying this. Does it relate to the audience? If so, great. That's the key thing. It's all well and good to show that you understand how to do something, but what's really important is why. Okay? So the key thing, justification. That's the big word, right? So overall, your activity log will be 15 pages, 5 from activity 1 and 10 for activity 2 in total. All right. What this person has done, which is really good, and I'd recommend that everyone does this, is they have put little text boxes on there to show what they are doing, but also what skill they're doing and how it relates to the brief. So for example, they've written here, this is me demonstrating how I did the text on a path. And you can see on the brief there that it says that you've got to show text on a path. So that is quite a good idea. So I would recommend doing that just to show off to the example that, hey, here's the skill you want to do, here's me doing it, look how mint I am. So that's not a bad idea. So, final thing for this video, it's only a little introduction, so obviously I'll go over this in more detail in lesson. Top tips. These are tips from me, but also tips from the exam board as well. First one, obviously, you have to meet all the requirements on the brief. If you miss one of those, technically you've not met the brief, and that's going to massively impact on your overall grade. Okay, if you miss a significant amount of the requirements on the brief, you're probably going to fail. Okay, so, however, I would always recommend that you try and basically use this as a chance to show off, right? Yes, you should do everything that the brief wants you to do. Doesn't mean you can't go above and beyond and do more and really show off and be really smug, yeah? Because you guys know so much, you've done so much stuff in your internal coursework, show off that stuff. Yeah, it might not be on the exam board, but it might be on the brief if you've done anything else. Show off, you know, be arrogant, you may as well do. What I'd also suggest as well is creativity is really important. Okay, that's what pushes you up to the top grades. Okay, be creative and show care and attention to detail. Like, for example, if I go back to the brief from last year, or from 2023, sorry, depending on when you're watching this, it says here, original icons that appear on every page, such as a forward and backwards button. So you could just make a really simple button that is made of a text icon, okay? Or you could be very creative and you could make something on Photoshop that looks a little bit nicer and has a little bit more style and attention to detail, like that button there, for example, okay? So it's always just thinking about, okay, how can I meet the requirements of the brief, but do it in a creative way? Do it in a way that shows a bit more attention to detail, okay? So be creative, okay? This one is really important. Believe it or not, you get graded on your general organisation and general housekeeping skills. Not just with things like your folders, but also things like your layers and your groups, your workspaces, alright? Name things properly. Keep yourself organised. Don't just find them and save it as document 1, or just mash the keyboard, or put a random name. So you do get graded on your organisational skills. So keep organised. I've already mentioned that you need to prove how and why you did something in your activity log, but also talk about the audience. Yeah? When you get your brief set, it should say who the audience is. There you go, young people aged 14 to 19 year olds for this brief. Alright? Reference that in your activity log. You've got to be talking about how you've always had your audience in mind when you are doing whatever it is you're doing, even things like the language you might use. Okay? So, consider the audience. Okay? Prove that you know why you're doing it is for them. Right? I mean, this is from the exam board, but obviously you're going to export and publish the final media product in the right way. It's on the brief anyway, so you don't need to worry too much about that. But for me, the big ones are these, well, all of them basically. You know, these are really, really important things to be talking about and be considering. Okay, so that's basically it for the introduction. If you have any questions, send me an email. Come and find me. You know where I am. But yeah, other than that, that's it for an introduction to the Unit 3 Digital Media Skills exam, and I'll catch you next time.